Apple's brand new 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro now comes with a double binned chip, and what I mean by that is that both the CPU and the GPU are binned, so you only get 8 cores instead of 10 on the unbinned model, and 14 GPU cores instead of 16. So to go from the bin model to the completely unbinned full M1 Pro chip, it costs $300. So what I'm gonna do in this video is run a ton of different tests. We've got benchmarks, we've got real world stuff, photo editing, video editing, programming, Logic Pro, music production, to find out if it's actually worth spending the extra $300 for the unbinned chip, or if you just grab the base model and be fine. So without further ado, let's get right into it. First things first, we've got the standard Geekbench 5 benchmark open right here, and as you can see, we have 16 gigs of RAM on both of these. Now, if you're interested in seeing if it's worth upgrading to 32, Max is actually gonna do a video with 16 versus 32 with the M1 Pro chip, and he's gonna be testing a bunch of different stuff, including a RAM stress test to see if it's worth spending the extra $400 or not. But without further ado, let's go ahead and run the CPU benchmark. And while this test is running, I do want to mention our giveaway. Yes, we are giving away a $2,500 MacBook Pro. It's actually this one right here, the 14-inch with a 1TB SSD. All you gotta do is make sure you're subscribed to our channel and leave a comment below on any of our launch week videos. What we're gonna do is choose one of those videos at random and choose a random comment, and we're gonna ship it to you no matter where you are in the world, no matter what kind of taxes there are, import taxes, we are shipping it to you, so be sure to subscribe and comment right now. All right, the test is finished, and we are pretty much getting expected results going from 8 cores to 10 cores, which is 25% more cores. We're actually getting 27% better multi-core performance, and the single core is actually staying basically the same because they are using the same performance cores. So far, that's actually a pretty good improvement for the $200. And now let's go ahead and move over to the graphics side and run Geekbench 5's metal graphics test. And there we go, we have our score 39687 on the unbinned version and 34736. That is a difference of 14% faster, and it actually lines up because it has 15% more GPU cores going from 14 to 16. So with that said, let's go ahead and do a different test. Let's get into GFXBench, which is a gaming test. And here we go, we have the standard 1440p Aztec Ruins high tier test. Let's begin. All right, we have our scores, and this is interesting. We have 165.5 FPS on the unbinned higher end model and 147.3 on the 14-core bin model. That is only 12.3% faster, so it looks like we're not getting, I guess, as big of an improvement in this test compared to Geekbench 5, so I think I'm gonna test just one more gaming benchmark. And here we have Wildlife Extreme. We're doing the unlimited mode test to basically stress them out as much as possible, so let's start. There you go, the test is finished, and it looks like we're getting the same results, 12.4% more FPS, 62.4 compared to 55.5. So in reality, for all the gamers out there, is it worth spending $300 to get the unbinned version? That's 15% more money to get 12.4% FPS. Well, honestly, in my opinion, I don't really think it's worth spending the extra money, because in reality, you could just turn down your graphics quality a little bit to get the same FPS. I don't know, you guys let me know, just comment down below, and you're gonna be entered into that giveaway anyway, so let us know. Now we are gonna return to some more graphics heavy tests with Final Cut Pro and some other things like that, but first I wanna get into the CPU processing side with the Cinebench R23 10-minute stress test, which is 3D rendering that uses the CPU. So with that said, let's go ahead and start the test. All right guys, while this is running, I opened up the power metrics within the terminal, and as you can see, we're using 30.4 watts on the 10-core model, basically 30 watts. And over here, we are actually using 22 watts. And what makes that interesting is that it's actually using 36% more wattage, even though it just has 2 extra high performance cores. So I wonder if it's actually gonna make it heat up more. Yes, in fact, we can see that the fans are actually running a little bit louder and faster here. 4,400 RPMs compared to 2,400. This one, the bin model, is running cooler. Wow, look at that, 4,400. And yes, if I get a little bit closer, I can hear the fans on the unbinned model, but not this one. I can't even hear the ones on the bin, so that's very interesting. And don't worry about fan noise, because by this time, over 5 minutes into the test, the previous Intel models would be screaming full blast on both of these. So this is actually really, really impressive that it's just barely audible. And now that we're almost 9 minutes into the test, I wanna check the thermals. So we have the binned model right here. The hottest point is on the keyboard right there, that hot spot, 44 degrees Celsius. Let's go over to this one, and interestingly, 43 degrees Celsius between the keyboard and the display. That's because of those exhaust vents, because the fans are spinning up faster, so it's blowing out that hot air, at least trying to. So that's actually really impressive. All right, the bin model is almost done, and there we go. Oh, wow, that is an interesting score. Go ahead and comment how much you think the performance difference is below, because wow, that's not what I expected. We got 12,292 points on the unbinned model and 9,486 points on the bin model. That means this one is 30% faster in the stress test. Now, the fans did have to ramp up more, but you are getting that extra performance. And if you're just going from the 8-core to the 10-core, that's a $200 upgrade. So that's 10% more money for 30% real world 100% CPU stress test performance, and I would say that is definitely worth it, at least for something like this, but we are gonna get into some real world tests very soon. And with that said, let's go ahead and get into our Xcode benchmark, which is for all of you programmers out there. But before we get started, I do wanna shout out our merch. This is our Apple product icon tee right here. We have a bunch of other stuff for you guys, and you can use the coupon code, promo code M1PRO to get 20% off on all of our merch. So definitely do that to help support this channel. Thank you guys, and let's get into this. And bam, they are running on both machines. We want to thank Maxim Eremenko for making this benchmark and this terminal script so it runs really quickly without having to do a bunch of extra steps. All right, we have our scores here, and this is actually different compared to how the beginning of this video went. It looks like we have 97 seconds for the unbinned model and 108.5 for the binned. That is a difference of only 19% faster for the more expensive model. We're not seeing those 30% improvements anymore. And the reason for that is because Xcode really takes advantage of the new unified memory architecture and the extra memory bandwidth. So you're getting both of the advantages with both of these. So I guess CPU isn't making that big of a difference here, but I do want to mention that 97 seconds is absolutely insane, because the best score ever registered was 90 seconds with the insanely expensive 28-core Xeon Mac Pro. So this thing is a beast for a 14-inch laptop. So I guess in the real world, both of these are just so screaming fast that you don't really have to pay the extra $200 for the unbinned model. You're still gonna get really, really great performance compared to Intel chips. All right, and here we are running the Logic Pro benchmark for all of you music producers out there. And as you can see, the unbinned model is running 155 tracks without overloading, which is consistent with the M1 Pro 16-inch. Now let's run the binned model, and we have 115. Now interestingly, in our previous video against the MacBook Air, it was able to do 115 tracks without overloading, but it is now, so I don't know why it's doing it. I'm gonna turn off a couple of tracks and see if it can handle, look at that, 113. It's not handling it. Let's go down to 110. It should be doing it. All right, and here we go. I went down to 105 tracks, and it seems to be running just fine. So you should be expecting between 105 to 115 tracks without overloading. Maybe there's some kind of background app or something running, but there you go. There's a difference, 105 to 155. So you're getting 50 more tracks that are running on the Unbinned model, which is actually really impressive. And if you want to know exactly what's going on within this benchmark, just go ahead and Google New Logic Pro benchmark, and you'll find out exactly what's going on and what instruments are playing. And now with that said, let's move over to Adobe Lightroom Classic. This is for all of you photo editors out there. Now, just for editing and doing stuff like that, maybe doing brushes, you should be expecting the same performance. As you can see, it actually kind of looks like the Unbinned model is switching images slightly faster. So hey, that's already a benefit for that more expensive model. But what I'm really interested in is the export test. So let's go ahead and export all 50 of these raw 42 megapixel images. Now I do want to mention while this is running that between these two, there's not really going to be that big of a difference in the real world for editing on the fly or in real time. So I wouldn't say it's really worth spending the extra $200 because these are just so fast compared to the old Intel models, but I'm interested to see how this export test goes. Now the Unbinned model is almost finished and the fans are really ramping up. 5,700 RPMs, it's actually almost maxed out, and let's see, it's about to finish. There you go, it's done. Dang, those fans are loud, and these ones are at 3,400 RPM, and I can just barely hear them. All right, the export is done, and the Unbinned model finished in 1 minute and 22 seconds compared to 1 minute and 45 for the Binned model. That is a difference of 28% faster for this more expensive one. Now, in reality, the everyday editing experience isn't gonna really change when you're actually editing the photos, but for the exports, of course, you get the faster 28% difference. However, the fans were blaring on this one, so it's a question of, do you want the faster performance with the trade-off of having a louder machine, or do you want the cheaper one that is more silent? I don't know, it's up to you to make that decision. So if you have any comments on that, leave them down below. And now moving on with Lightroom out of the way, let's go ahead and move into a GPU test. This is Blender. This is the Party Tug test that you could actually download from the internet and test it yourself on your machine and compare to these scores. So this is going to be using the GPU. So let's go ahead and render them. All right, there we go. And this difference is hilarious. 9.06 seconds for the more expensive model, 9.74 for the Binned model. There's basically no difference. If you're doing this type of GPU rendering with Blender, there is no reason to go for this Unbinned 14-inch. Now, you might want to go for the M1 Max model, but not from the Binned to the Unbinned. And now we're gonna switch it up a little bit with the Splash Fox test, which you can also download. Now this is gonna be using the CPU instead of the GPU, so we're gonna see how much more performance you get going from 8 cores to 10 cores. Let's begin. And there we go, the test is finished. Now go ahead and guess the difference because this is kind of funny. The Unbinned model is 2.8% faster. Wow, so I guess there's no difference between the Binned and the Unbinned, and I think the reason for that is because it's not fully utilizing the CPU. It's not going up to 100% usage, it's staying down, so I wonder if there's some kind of other limit that's not allowing us to get the full performance. But either way, for all you Blender renderers out there, you're totally fine with the less expensive Binned model. And now moving on, let's go ahead and get into video editing with Final Cut Pro. It's a very popular app. This is one of the reasons why a lot of people buy Macs. So our first test we're gonna do is 4K H.264 video editing. Now I wanna mention that this is probably the most common codec for shooting videos. In fact, all of our videos on our YouTube channel are shot in 4K H.264, which is this. So let's go ahead and run an export test to see which one's faster. I've got my timer right here, and let's go ahead and begin. We're over halfway through this test, and if you look at the percentages, the progress, they're both neck and neck, basically 60% on both of them. And the point I want to make is that neither of the GPUs are getting maxed out. Even the Binned model is only at 66%. That's because both of these share the same video encoders and and this test is limited by the encoders. Now we do have some effects, we have 2 LUTs and fill grain, but that is not enough to put enough of a stress on the GPU. Now, if you're loading tons and tons of effects, then maybe there's gonna be a difference, but in reality, as you can see, they're both at the same progress. The test is done and both models finished at the exact same time, 2 minutes and 55 seconds. So in reality, I don't think it's worth upgrading to the unbinned version because going from 8 cores to 10 cores is gonna do literally nothing for video editing in Final Cut Pro because there are no codecs that really stress the CPU. Now that Red RAW and Canon RAW are GPU based, the CPU difference makes no difference. And for the GPU, as you saw, we're getting the same export speeds for the most common video codec. So don't upgrade for this kind of stuff. And now let's get into the big guns. We are doing ProRes RAW, but luckily these new M1 Pro and M1 Max MacBook Pros come with ProRes and ProRes RAW video encoders and decoders. So that means when you're playing it back, there's really no difference because they're both relying on those media engines. And now I'm gonna be doing a export test. Let's go ahead and start it. We're gonna see if there's gonna be a difference here with the GPU differences, but I think it's gonna be pretty close. Let's see. And there you go, the test is finished, and just as expected, there is barely any difference. The unbinned model finished in 1 minute and 4 seconds compared to 1 minute and 7 seconds with the less expensive binned model. So because they're really relying on those ProRes encoders, the 15% GPU core difference isn't really doing enough to matter. So these machines are basically flying through ProRes compared to any other machine. So with that said, and those video editing tests out of the way, I would say if you're using Final Cut Pro or doing video editing, definitely do not upgrade to the unbinned model because they're basically neck and neck the same, relying on those awesome new encoders. All right, guys, wow, that was a ton of benchmarks. So finally, let's answer the original question. Is it worth paying more on the 14-inch to get the unbinned M1 Pro, or should you just save that money? Well, in reality, from all of our testing, I would say that it is not worth it because even in gaming, you did get an improvement, but not by that much. And Xcode, it was a little bit faster, but it's already crazy fast compared to Intel machines, and video editing, basically no difference. The biggest difference we actually saw was in Lightroom, where you did get a nice jump in performance, but in reality, you're not spending all the time, all day exporting. You're doing the edits in real time to the photos, and between those two, there's not really a difference. Actually, if I remember correctly, there was a difference. The more expensive model was actually louder because it's using more wattage, so that's an even bigger plus for that base model. So with all of that said, I do not think that most people should be upgrading to the unbinned model. Just save your money and spend it on something else like an SSD storage upgrade, or you can upgrade the RAM from 16 gigs to 32 gigs, and that might actually give you a real difference. And that is exactly what we're gonna be testing in our next video. And by the time you're watching right now, that video may already be done, so check right over there. And if it is, definitely watch that video. And if you're not already subscribed, click the circle above to enter that giveaway. Don't forget to comment down below, guys. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.